Yeah.
Yes,
Sir,
sir.
please tell few words, sir. Please
Yeah,
tell
we
few
have
words. to
Naveen
all.
Jain, sir, who is, it's our pride from India, that he has been an editor and
Yeah.
author for Clarity Manual of Newborn Care, sir.
Convey my congratulations.
Sir, you can convey him directly. He's online, sir.
Naveen,
tell-
congrats.
So thank you, sir. Thank you for your blessings.
It's really a
tell-
great achievement. Yeah.
Tell few words. There are more than 280 people, 90 people are joined already. Tell few words about our webinar, sir. You are joining every day. You are joining. Thank you very
Yeah,
much,
I'm enjoying and learning.
sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
You are making me learn at this age, no?
Okay. Prashant, you can start here.
Yeah. I would like to welcome all the participants who have joined within the state, outside state, within country, and outside country. Thank you very much for joining. So today is really a special one, and we got a special news as well. As we said, Dr. Naveen Jain is joining us as a speaker, and we have Dr. Pratik. So we will start with Dr. Pratik with the hypertension of neonate. And we would like to keep Naveen sir's talk second and then let it continue, and we'll have discussion after that. So today's sessions will be moderated by Leslie Lewis sir. He also doesn't need any introduction, and he's our favorite sir from KMC Mangalore. Leslie sir, welcome sir. I request you to introduce Naveen sir and now Pratik, and then we will start the session, sir.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Dr. Pratik, he is presently working as Assistant Professor of Neonatology at Indira Gandhi Institute of Child Health, Bangalore. I think he has recently joined there. And I don't have...
Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir.
I think without much waste of time, I just ask Dr. Pratik to take over the session. And at the end of 2 talks, we'll have a discussion as Prashant has mentioned. We'll start. Pratik, go ahead.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Pratik, start.
Sir, is it audible?
Yes,
It's
very
audible.
clearly audible.
Pratik, go ahead. Sorry, just go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Today I'm going to discuss about the hypertension in neonates. Slide. Okay. The learning objectives of this presentation will be to know the factors affecting the blood pressure in neonates and also to know the changes after birth, to know the etiology of neonatal hypertension, and to how to measure the blood pressure in neonate and workup and management of a case of neonatal hypertension. Coming to introduction, advances in neonatal care has increased the awareness of hypertension among the neonatologists, but there are no well-established BP normative values in neonate, and there are also no good guidelines for management. And there is also paucity of information on treatment of hypertension. Let us see what is the definition of hypertension. Hypertension is defined as systolic or diastolic blood pressure more than 95th centile for postmenstrual age on at least 3 separate occasions. The incidence of hypertension is about 0.2% in healthy term babies, and it's about 1% in term babies who are admitted to NICU, and it's about 1.4% in the preterm babies who are again admitted to the NICU. It means it is more in the preterm babies who require NICU admission. So since the incidence of hypertension is very less in healthy term babies, there is no role of routine recording of blood pressure in healthy term babies. And all the NICU admissions, whether it is a term baby or a preterm baby, blood pressure should be recorded. This is the statement given by the American Academy of Pediatrics. Let us see what are the factors which affect neonatal blood pressure. One of the important factors which affect neonatal blood pressure is birth weight and gestational age. That is, the blood pressure is directly proportional to birth weight and gestational age. As the birth weight and gestation increases, the blood pressure also gradually increases. High maternal body mass index and low socioeconomic status also affect the BP. Most of these babies have higher blood pressure. The preterm borns to infant of diabetic mothers also have high BP. Maternal hypertension and substance abuse also results in higher blood pressure in the neonates compared to other babies. HELLP syndrome and chorioamnionitis, these neonates have lower BP. Surprisingly, antenatal steroids do not have any effect on blood pressure in neonates. This is a graph which is showing the relationship between gestational age and blood pressure. This is one of the older studies by Zubro et al., where BP recordings were taken on day 1 of life. You can see here, as the gestational age increases, both the systolic and diastolic BP gradually increases. So more the gestation, more is the BP. Similarly, birth weight and blood pressure, as the birth weight gradually increases, the blood pressure also increases. This accounts for both the systolic and also for the diastolic BP. Let us see what is the relationship between postnatal age and blood pressure. This is one of the recent studies by Pejovic et al., where he has seen the blood pressure recordings from 28 weeks of gestation till 37 weeks. You can see here, as the postnatal days increases, the blood pressure also gradually raises. It usually raises by 1 millimeter to 2 millimeter per day. So based on this data, we can see these centile charts has been devised. In these charts, you have what is 50th centile, 95th centile, and 99th centile. It is of paramount importance to know that you should always know what is the post-menstrual age, because in these charts, it is the post-menstrual age which is taken into account while considering the blood pressure. So post-menstrual age, which was previously called as post-conceptual age, is actually the gestational age in weeks plus postnatal age in days. That, for example, if the baby is 30 weeks old and if he is somewhere around 14 days of life today, so his post-menstrual age will be 32 weeks. So you have to see the blood pressure in 32 weeks chart. Another factor which affects the blood pressure in neonates is the state of the baby. This is the graph which is showing the Brazelton's neurobehavioral scale. As the state of the baby is from the changes from state 1 to state 6, the blood pressure is also slightly increasing. Let us see what are the etiologies of hypertension. These are the common etiologies of hypertension, which is described in the Avery's textbook. Broadly, it is classified as renovascular, renal parenchymal disease, pulmonary causes, cardiac causes, endocrine causes, medication related, tumors or neoplasms, neurologic causes, and few miscellaneous causes of hypertension. Let us see each cause one by one. Coming to the renovascular cause, one of the common causes of renovascular hypertension is thromboembolism. The main reason for this thromboembolism is injury to the endothelium, mainly by the umbilical artery. This happens usually during the umbilical artery catheterization. And another common cause of renovascular hypertension is renal artery stenosis. Renal artery stenosis in neonates is most commonly caused due to fibromuscular dysplasia. Here, the artery stenosis is not in the main renal artery, but it is more commonly seen in the branched renal artery. Other causes of renovascular hypertension are coarctation of aorta, that is mid-aortic coarctation, renal vein thrombosis. Renal vein thrombosis is also one of the common cause, which can present as a triad of hematuria, thrombocytopenia, and flank mass. Compression of the renal artery by any mass or a large hydronephrotic kidney can also result in renovascular hypertension. Idiopathic arterial calcification has been described in older neonates and early infancy. It's a very rare differential diagnosis. So among all the renovascular causes, it is the thromboembolism which is very common. So this is the Cochrane database systematic review, which compared the position of umbilical artery catheter tip, and the main outcome was whether to see whether the higher catheter is better or the lower tip position is better. Even though with respect to other outcomes, higher catheter was supposed to be better, but with respect to hypertension, there was no difference between the two groups with respect to the position of catheters, because the injury, whatever happens during the umbilical arterial catheterization, happens during the time of insertion. So the position of catheter does not have much role with respect to the hypertension, whereas with respect to the limb swelling or gangrene, the lower position catheters have a higher risk. Coming to other renal causes of hypertension, the other common causes are congenital anomalies of kidney and urinary tract, which includes polycystic kidney disease. Most commonly in newborns, we find what is called autosomal recessive polycystic kidney disease. Multicystic dysplastic kidney is also another differential diagnosis for neonatal hypertension. It's the possible reason is because of the release of renin from the macrophages within the multicystic dysplastic kidney. Uretropelvic junction obstruction can also result in hypertension. Other causes include renal hypodysplasia and renal tubular dysgenesis. Acquired renal causes include acute renal failure leading to acute tubular necrosis, interstitial nephritis, and renal stones are quite rare in newborns. Pulmonary causes of hypertension includes bronchopulmonary dysplasia and pneumothorax. Bronchopulmonary dysplasia is one of the common causes of hypertension in neonates. The incidence of hypertension in BPD is somewhere between 13 to as high as 43%. The causes of hypertension, or the factors which are implicated in hypertension in BPD, are mainly because of prolonged hypoxemia, or it may be, and hypertension also depends on severity of BPD. It is also related to the corticosteroid intake in BPD cases, and also due to administration of caffeine. In neonates with bronchopulmonary dysplasias, these newborns can have a normal BP in neonatal period, whereas the same babies can end up with hypertension on follow-up. So it is very important to record the BP in these babies in follow-up clinic. Mainly the babies who had suffered from bronchopulmonary dysplasias, they can have a normal BP in the NICU, whereas they can end up with hypertension on the follow-up clinic. Coming to the cardiac cause, one of the important differential diagnosis in cardiac cause is coarctation of aorta. So it is very important to palpate the femoral pulses for all the NICU admissions. Especially the femoral pulses may be palpable in first 1 or 2 days, but just before discharge also one should always palpate the femoral pulses. Neurologic causes include pain, intracranial hypertension, seizures, and subdural hematoma. Medications which cause hypertension in a neonate include dexamethasone, vitamin D intoxication, caffeine, inotrope intake, and pancuronium. Muscle relaxant like pancuronium can also, but it's not used routinely. Tumors or neoplastic lesions which can lead to hypertension are Wilms tumor, mesoblastic nephroma, neuroblastoma, and pheochromocytoma. Other miscellaneous causes are hypercalcemia. Hypercalcemia can also result in silent hypertension. ECMO therapy also results in hypertension, and one of the common causes of hypertension, not common, and one of the uncommon causes of hypertension. And fluid overload is one of the common causes of hypertension. One should always look for hidden sodium intakes, which leads to fluid overload. Like medications, some medications can have a sodium in them, and also with when you give arterial flushes or saline infusions in the arterial line, that can also result in excessive sodium load and fluid retention. This may result also in hypertension. Common endocrine causes are congenital adrenal hyperplasia, hyperaldosteronism, hyperthyroidism, and pseudo hypoaldosteronism type 2. Let us see the few important differential diagnoses among the endocrine causes. One of the most common causes, endocrine causes causing hypertension is CAH among all the endocrine causes. See, in CAH, it is the 11 beta hydroxylase deficiency and also the 17 alpha hydroxylase deficiency which cause hypertension. 11 beta hydroxylase is responsible for conversion of deoxycorticosterone to corticosterone, and also for conversion of deoxycortisol to cortisol. So if there is any block in this enzyme, then there will be elevation of deoxycorticosterone. This deoxycorticosterone is a potent mineralocorticoid which can result in hypertension. Another enzyme which is implicated in hypertension in CAH is 17 alpha hydroxylase. Again, if there is a block in this pathway, this precursor pathway will increase. Again, there will be increase in the 11 deoxycorticosterone. So which in turn results in sodium retention and fluid retention and hypertension. Coming to the genetic causes of hypertension. Genetic causes of hypertension can be broadly divided into single gene disorders and malformation syndromes. Single gene disorders, it is called as monogenic hypertension. These are the common differential diagnosis of single gene disorders. That is, these are all quite rare, but it is very important to know them. Syndrome of apparent mineralocorticoid excess, glucocorticoid remediable aldosteronism, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, Liddle syndrome, and Gordon syndrome. A peculiar feature in all these syndromes is the potassium level in most of them, except for Gordon syndrome, is decreased. The plasma renin activity is also decreased. So any neonate who presents with hypertension and hypokalemia along with low plasma renin activity or low renin, then a differential diagnosis of monogenic hypertension should be strongly considered. Coming to the hypertension in malformation syndromes, Williams syndromes can cause hypertension because of renal artery stenosis. Usually they have hypercalcemia and supravalvular aortic stenosis. So they can all these patients can also have renal artery stenosis. Turner syndrome, as we know, can have associated coarctation of aorta and can result in hypertension. Neurofibromatosis can lead to renal artery stenosis and coarctation. Cockayne syndrome, the reason for hypertension is not known. But most of these malformation syndromes, the hypertension is present beyond the neonatal period. It usually won't manifest in the neonatal age group. So in conclusion, the commonly encountered differential diagnosis in clinical practice causing hypertension in neonates are renovascular hypertension, congenital and acquired renal disease, and bronchopulmonary dysplasia. These are the common conditions which cause hypertension in the neonatal age group and in the NICU babies. So coming to the clinical presentation, most of these babies who are hypertensive can be asymptomatic, and they can be detected on routine examination as a part of vital examination. They can also present with congestive cardiac failure and cardiogenic shock. These babies can have non-specific symptoms like feeding difficulties, unexplained tachypnea, apnea, lethargy, irritability, or seizures. And NICU graduates who can also present as unexplained irritability or failure to thrive. And these two symptoms can be the only manifestation of increased blood pressure in these babies. Coming to diagnostic evaluation, the first important question when you should be asked is the BP being measured correctly? Second important question one should ask to oneself when a high reading comes is whether the hypertension is persistent or it is just episodic. If the BP is correctly measured with appropriate sized cuff, and if there is persistent elevation of blood pressure, then a diagnosis of hypertension should be made. Let us see what are the methods of blood pressure estimation. You have indirect method and direct method. In indirect method, you have palpation and auscultation, the measurement of blood pressure by Doppler and by oscillometric device. Among all these indirect methods, palpation, auscultation, and Doppler estimation are not routinely used. It is the oscillometric devices which are commonly used in our NICUs for measurement of blood pressure. In the direct method, you have what is called as intra-arterial blood pressure. Intra-arterial blood pressure is the gold standard for measurement of blood pressure. In the intra-arterial blood pressure, which is better, either umbilical or peripheral arterial catheter? This was a very old study which was conducted by Byte et al. To see whether peripheral arterial blood pressure correlates with umbilical blood pressure or not. You can see here there is a very strong correlation between peripheral artery BP and also the umbilical artery BP. This holds good for both systolic BP and also for diastolic BP. So there is a good correlation between umbilical artery BP and peripheral BP, and either of them can be preferred if you want to do invasive blood pressure monitoring for any case of severe hypertension. Now coming to the commonly used method or commonly used method to detect the hypertension in babies or used to measure the blood pressure in babies, that is oscillometric method. In oscillometric method, usually the cuff is wrapped around the neonate's hand and the cuff is gradually inflated. The cuff is gradually inflated above the systolic blood pressure, systolic BP of the baby. Once the once the cuff is inflated above the systolic BP blood pressure of the baby, there will be no blood flow across the artery. Gradually, the cuff pressure is released. As the cuff pressure is gradually released, there will be blood flow in the artery, that is pulsatile blood flow. That pulsatile blood flow is transmitted to the cuff. So there will be oscillations which is transmitted to the cuff. So as the cuff pressure is released, there is blood flow. At the same time, there will be oscillations in the cuff. So this oscillations keeps on increasing as the pressure is released, and there will be attainment of peak oscillations. And after some time, there will be gradual fall in the oscillation. So the point of this peak oscillation corresponds to mean arterial pressure, what we call MAP in the babies, that is the point of peak oscillation. So oscillometric method measures mean arterial blood pressure. Here the BP recordings are usually 5 mm higher than the intra-arterial method. Here the systolic blood pressure and diastolic BP are calculated based on an algorithm. Only MAP is calculated, other systolic and diastolic BP are calculated from the algorithm. So oscillometric method is most accurate for MAP, followed by systolic BP, and it is least accurate for diastolic BP. Coming to the appropriate cuff size for measurement of blood pressure, the cuff bladder length, that is the length of the cuff, should encircle at least 80 to 100% of the arm circumference. And the width to length ratio, that is the width of the cuff, should be at least 0.45 to 0.55. The ratio should be at least 0.45 to 0.55. And the blood pressure which are measured at the cuff they are generally same as the upper limb BPs. And this effect will last for up to 6 months of age. Means even if you measure a upper limb BP or a BP in the calf, the blood pressure will remain the same till 6 months of age. So coming to neonatal state and blood pressure, as I told earlier, the state also the blood pressure also depends on the state of the baby. If the baby is in deep sleep, the blood pressure recorded values will be low. As the state increases, the blood pressure will increase. Other factors which affect blood pressure are crying, agitation, feeding, pain, and procedures in the neonate. So since there are so many factors which affect the BP, a protocol has been devised by Noonko. This is the commonly described protocol in many standard textbooks and reviews. According to this protocol, for estimation of blood pressure in newborn, oscillometric device should be used. Timing of reading should be 1.5 hours after feeding or any medical intervention or procedure. And after you place a cuff on a baby, you have to wait for at least 15 minutes to record a BP. Position, newborn can be either supine or prone. State, either it is asleep or quietly awake. The extremity which is preferred is right upper arm. Number of readings to be taken is 3 readings at 2-minute interval. This protocol should be followed, especially if you get a higher reading of BP. Among these 3 readings, the first reading should be usually ignored because usually it gives a false value compared to second and third reading. A mean of second and third reading should be taken. Coming to the history in a baby who has hypertension, the history should be appropriate and it should be focused. Maternal history of steroids, even though it doesn't have much effect, cocaine, heroin intake, maternal history of hypertension, diabetes, and obesity should be taken. Prenatal ultrasound should be, a report should be seen to look for any oligo or renal anomalies. Postnatal medications like steroids, adrenergic agonists, caffeine intake, and indomethacin intake should be taken. History of any procedures like umbilical artery catheterization should also be taken. A review of NICU record should be done to see the weight gain pattern in the NICU and also to check the fluid status of the baby. Coming to the examination in a baby with hypertension, the examination should be focused and to detect the hypertension. All newborns who have hypertension should have 4-limb BP. That is mainly to rule out the coarctation of aorta. If the baby is dysmorphic or has an ambiguous genitalia, then a diagnosis of CAH or Turner syndrome and other malformation syndrome should be kept in mind. A baby having a flank mass, differential diagnosis of hydronephrosis, PUJ obstruction, or adrenal mass, or any other renal mass should be kept. If you hear a bruit in epigastric region or in the flanks, then a differential diagnosis of renal artery stenosis should be considered. Coming to the investigations, the common first-line investigations which are done, which are generally useful in a case of neonatal hypertension, are urine analysis with or without blood culture, complete blood count and platelet count. Platelet count will help us to diagnose the, will give a clue about renal vein thrombosis, and electrolyte level, especially sodium and potassium, blood urea nitrogen and creatinine level to know the renal function, calcium, because hypercalcemia is commonly associated with hypertension, chest X-ray, renal ultrasound, and Doppler of both renal arteries and renal veins. These are the second-line investigations. They are useful only in selected neonates where a specific condition is suspected. Thyroid studies should be done, especially if you are suspecting hyperthyroidism. One unique feature is in hyperthyroidism babies can have tachycardia, and usually they have systolic hypertension. Echocardiogram mainly to rule out coarctation of aorta. Echo mainly rules out the coarct in the arch, but may not be useful for a thoracic coarctation. Aldosterone level and cortisol in selected patients. Urine vinyl mandelic acid and urinary 24-hour metanephrines and plasma metanephrines can be useful in pheochromocytoma. Voiding cystourethrogram for, especially if you are suspecting any renal condition like PUV or hydronephrosis, it can be useful. Renal angiography is not of much use in neonates because as I told earlier, it is mainly the branched renal artery stenosis which causes hypertension in neonates. The main renal artery may be normal. So a finding of normal what you call main renal artery in angiography does not rule out hypertension due to renal artery stenosis, especially in neonates, because it is mainly the branched renal artery stenosis which commonly affects in these babies. Plasma renin activity. Plasma renin activity is not a useful initial investigations in a babies because most of the preterm babies can have high levels, and it is useful only if there is a persistent hypertension and as can be considered as a second line test. and it will be useful, especially if the baby has hypokalemia and hypertension. In this condition, the plasma renin activity can be useful. There are so many other conditions where the plasma renin activity will be elevated, like preterms, as I told earlier, diuretic use, and intake of adrenergic agents. So it's especially useful if the patient is having hypokalemia, because the low values will be more useful rather than a high plasma renin activity. Coming to the treatment, there are no evidence-based guidelines for management of hypertension in neonates. We don't know whether to treat asymptomatic babies or not. There are no clinical trials on antihypertensive agents, and there is no data on efficacy and safety of antihypertensives. Treatment recommendations in neonates are mainly based on few case series, and they're based on expert recommendations. So first important thing in treatment is you have to correct all the correctable causes, like inotropes should be reduced, medications, medication intake should be seen, what medications the baby is on, and they should be gradually tapered and stopped. A special focus should be given on hypercalcemia and pain in the newborns. Fluid status of the baby also should be checked. These are the correctable causes which should be corrected before starting the pharmacotherapy. In spite of correcting all these causes, if the BP is still high, then treatment should be started. Pharmacological treatment should be initiated if blood pressure is more than 99th centile for postmenstrual age, irrespective of whether the baby has symptoms or not. And if the BP is more than 95th centile with symptoms, or if there are any features of end organ damage, then treatment should be initiated. Features of end organ damage are left ventricular hypertrophy, altered mental status, and acute kidney injury. Means in any end organ, if there is any features of damage, then even if the BP is more than 95th centile, then a treatment should be initiated. This is one of the latest treatment recommendations which was published in Pediatric Nephrology last year. In this, if the BP is less than 95th centile, then there is no need to treat the case. If the BP is between 95th to 99th centile, and if the neonate is healthy, and if there is no end organ involvement, again there is no need to treat. But if the BP is more than 95th to 90, between 95th to 99th centile, and if the baby is hospitalized and sick, even if there is no end organ involvement, then treatment with oral medication should be considered. So this constitutes what is called as mild hypertension. If the blood pressure is between 95th to 99th centile, and if the neonate is healthy, if there is end organ involvement, definitely the treatment should be initiated with oral medication. And if the neonate is sick with end organ involvement, then treatment with oral or IV should be considered. As I told earlier, more than 99th centile, even if the baby is healthy, even if there is no end organ involvement, the neonate needs to be treated with oral medication. If neonate is healthy and or hospitalized, but if there is involvement of end organ, even if the neonate is healthy, if there is involvement of end organ like altered mental status or features of LVH in echo, then treatment should be initiated with IV medications. Hypertensive emergency in newborn is defined as systolic BP more than 120, diastolic BP more than 19 terms, and diastolic BP more than 18 preterms. All these neonates needs to be hospitalized and treated with IV infusions. Let us see the commonly available oral antihypertensives and their mechanism of action. The first class is calcium channel blockers. Among the calcium channel blockers, you have amlodipine, isradipine, and nifedipine. Amlodipine is slow acting and it has a prolonged action. It can be considered as a first line drug, especially in our situation where isradipine is not available. And other drugs are isradipine and nifedipine. Both of them can have a side effect of tachycardia. Other class of drug is beta blocker. The most commonly available drug is propranolol. Propranolol in turn reduces the secretion of renin and norepinephrine apart from the vasodilation. And the dose is about 0.25 mg per kg per dose. One side effect of propranolol is it causes hyperkalemia, especially if the newborn has underlying renal disease. So in causes of renal hypertension, this drug should be avoided. And as a side effect, it can also cause hypoglycemia. And in the neonates with bronchopulmonary dysplasia, propranolol should be avoided because it can end up with because these neonates can end up with BPD spells because of beta blockade. Another class of drug is alpha and beta blocker, that is labetalol. Labetalol is available both in oral and IV form. Dose is 1 to 3 mg per kg per day. Again, the caution is it should not be used in neonates who have BPD because it can cause bronchospasm. Diuretics also sometimes used like chlorothiazide and spironolactone. Caution is it should be used very cautiously in neonates with renal failure. Other oral antihypertensive category is ACE inhibitors. The commonly available oral ACE inhibitors are captopril, enalapril, and lisinopril. The dose is somewhere between 0.01 to 0.6 mg per kg per day. The side effects of ACE inhibitors are, if you are giving ACE inhibitors along with diuretics, it may result in rapid fall of blood pressure. It should be avoided in preterms, especially during the phase of nephrogenesis, that is till at least 44 weeks of postmenstrual age. ACE inhibitors can also cause acute kidney injury. It can also result in hyperkalemia. ACE inhibitors should be avoided in preterms. Other class of oral antihypertensives are central alpha agonist, that is clonidine, which is rarely used. Vasodilators are other class of drugs, that is which include hydralazine and minoxidil. Hydralazine can cause tachycardia and edema, and minoxidil should be used only for refractory hypertension, where other drugs are not working. Then only these drugs should be used. So in summary, calcium channel blockers can be considered as a first line drug. Beta blockers can also be used as a first line, but if some conditions like bronchopulmonary dysplasias, beta blockers can't be used. So first you can use calcium channel blockers, followed by beta blockers, followed by vasodilators. ACE inhibitors routinely should not be used because of so many side effects, especially in preterm babies. When you treat a baby with hypertension, the target blood pressure should be maintained between 50th to 95th centile. Coming to the intravenous antihypertensives therapy, the commonly available intravenous antihypertensives are vasodilators like hydralazine, which was available in oral form also, and sodium nitroprusside. Both of these drugs can cause tachycardia. Sodium nitroprusside you should not give for more than 3 days because it may lead to cyanide and thiocyanate toxicity. Other commonly used calcium channel blocker, that is IV calcium channel blockers, which most Western literature describes, is nicardipine. Nicardipine is used in a dose of 0.5 to 2 microgram per kg per minute infusion. Again, the side effect is tachycardia and edema. Most of the Western units use nicardipine as a first line. Other class of drugs are alpha and beta blocker, that is labetalol. Labetalol, again, IV, when you're giving, it should be used cautiously in cases with BPD. Other class IV drugs are ACE inhibitors. ACE inhibitors IV preparation only which is available is enalaprilat, but because of so many side effects and because of so many contraindications, usually IV enalaprilat should not be used in newborns. In case of hypertensive emergency, there should always be slow reduction of blood pressure. There should not be more than 25% reduction in the BP in the first 8 hours. This is mainly to prevent the cerebral ischemia due to sudden fall in the blood pressure. Surgical treatment is required if the patient is having hydronephrosis or PUJ obstruction, which can compress on the renal arteries and cause hypertension. In these cases, surgical treatment is required. Coarctation of aorta also needs to be corrected with coarctoplasty. In renal artery stenosis, surgical treatment is required. And same thing holds with the Wilms tumor and neuroblastoma. Coming to outcome and prognosis, patient with severe hypertension and neurologic or cardiac or renal decompensation usually have a high mortality rate. If the hypertension is due to thromboembolism or bronchopulmonary dysplasia, usually the BP gradually resolves within 6 to 12 months of age. If it is due to parenchymal renal disease, the persistent hypertension may be present throughout the childhood. In coarctation also, there is a risk of long-term hypertension. And if there is a recurrence of hypertension in a baby who had previous coarctoplasty, then recurrence of coarctation should be suspected. Take-home messages: blood pressure should be recorded in all neonates who are admitted to NICU. Appropriate size cuff must be used while recording BP in neonates. NICU graduates with bronchopulmonary dysplasia should have BP measurement in the follow-up clinic because these babies can have hypertension in follow-up. Common causes of the hypertension should be ruled out before going in for second-line investigations or more complicated investigations. Thank you.
Thank you, Pratik. Leslie, sir.
Yeah, yes, Prashant.
Yes.
Just summing up what Dr. Pratik has done, I think he has very well elaborated the causes of hypertension in neonates. One BP recording in neonates is always a forgotten art and he has highlighted very well. And he has also mentioned that the requirement of a BP recording charts in every NICU, as mentioned also, every chart, every textbook of neonatology, the BP recording chart. I think one of the thing which is should be there for all NICU, the 50th and 90th centile from all gestational age. The another thing, he has very well highlighted the causes of hypertension in neonates, starting from renovascular, renal diseases, and then going into respiratory causes like bronchopulmonary dysplasia, and given a lot of importance to extra sodium overload. So, and very apt thing is, very apt thing is, we have to monitor the blood pressure for all babies admitted to intensive care unit. We need to monitor critically ill babies periodically, and babies with the chronic lung diseases, babies with the renal diseases has to be followed for a blood pressure during the follow-up. So the recording of the blood pressure is a mandatory in our case sheet as well as in the follow-up. Thank you, Pratik. You have highlighted very well. So should we take up the questions, Prashant, at the end?
No, at the end, sir, at the end.
Okay.
We'll move on to the next topic.
Yeah, we'll go to the next session.
Pratik, just stop sharing the screen.
Sure.
The one which you can see on the top. Meanwhile, we have Bidri sir who has joined. Hello, sir. Bidri sir.
Hello,
Yes, sir.
Dr. Jain. Congratulations. We are proud of you.
Thank you so much, sir.
I think we have. Meanwhile, when you are doing, sir, we'll just try to. I think we have PP Maya sir also. So joined us. Yeah.
ಬ್ಲೋರ್ ಒಂದು ರಿಪೇರ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಬಿಡ್ರಿ ವಾಲ್ ಕೂಡ
ಹೌದಾ?
ಹಾ ಈ ಗನ್ನ ಪನ್ನ ಎಲ್ಲ ಇದು ಔಷಧ ಚಾಲು ಇಟ್ಬಿಡ್ರಿ ವಾಶ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿ ಇದನ್ನ ಹಾಕಲ್ಲ ಗ್ರೀಸ್ ಅದು ತೆಗ್ದು ಬಿಡಿ ಆಯಿಲ್ ಬಿಡಿ ಇದನ್ನ ಗ್ರೀಸಿಂಗ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮುಂದಿನ ನೋಡ್ ಮುಂಜಾನೆ 6-6:30 ಸ್ಪ್ರೇ ಚಾಲು ಆಗ್ಬೇಕು ನಾ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸಜ್ಜ 12 ಮಟ ಬಿಸಿಲಾಗ ರೆಸ್ಟ್ ತೊಗೊಂಡ್ರೆ ನಡೀವಿ ಒಂದ್ ಮತ್ತೆ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಮುಂದೆ ಔಷಧಿನ ಕೊಡ್ತೀವಿ
ತಂದಿವಿ. ಈಗ ಈಗ ಮತ್ತೆ ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸ್ ನಡು ತಂದಲ್ಲ ಏನು
ಏನದ
ಮತ್ತೊಂದಿಷ್ಟು ಐಟಮ್ ತಂದಲ್ಲ ನಡು ಮತ್ ಸುಟ್ಲಿ ಮತ್ತೆ.
Sir Naveen sir, you can start sharing the screen.
Sure.
And start the session, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I can hear you. The slideshow mode. Yeah.
Firstly, congratulations to Pratik. A very lucid presentation, Pratik.
Thank you, sir.
So we will just go to the other side of the medical problem that we see probably a little more often than hypertension. It's not a common situation that we get a call from the NICU where the resident feels the baby is very sick and he asks, shall I start dopamine, dobutamine? And the consultant asks back, what is the blood pressure? How is the perfusion of the baby? So with this question, we will try to answer when to start, what to start, how do I treat shock in a neonate? That would be the question, but I would probably reframe the topic as circulation in neonate and how do I approach it. This circle that you see is very evident that it's representing circulation. And the purpose is to take oxygen and glucose from the liver to the heart and then to the rest of the body, and take away waste products from the cells again and excrete it. So this circulation is going on continuously in the body to take metabolites to where they belong and also take away waste products. Whenever there is a mismatch, that is, you're not able to take the metabolites to the cells because of poor circulation of blood, and you're not able to take away these waste products away from the cells, this would result in what is called a state of shock.
Sir, they're requesting to speak little louder, sir.
Yeah. So you can see at the, is it better now?
Little more louder, sir.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, this is better, sir.
That's right. So when you look at the level of the cell, you can see that the tissue perfusion is what matters. And at the capillary level, you are losing the glucose and oxygen is being given to the cells, and waste products are being taken away into the capillary. This is what the purpose of perfusion is at the end of the day. And if there is shock, that is poor perfusion, there would be cell death because of not getting oxygen and glucose. And wherever there are cells, you can see cells are there in the brain, in the heart, the intestine, the liver, pancreas, lung, in the hemostatic tissues, kidneys, name it, wherever you are, as the shock gets worsened, cell death would start happening. Now, how does our body control the circulation? One major step that we always think of is by regulating the general circulation. That is, there is an increase in cardiac output that happens from the heart, and then there is an increase in resistance of the peripheral vascular system, causing the blood pressure to improve. Most often we think of medications which can either increase the cardiac output or increase the vascular resistance and therefore regulate the shock once again. But this is not the only part which is there. Besides thinking how we control, we need to ask one question: why do we control the circulation? So we already saw the purpose of circulation is to take metabolites to the cells and take waste products away. And we also know that regional circulations, that is, the circulation happening to different parts of the body, is totally different in resting state and in sickness. So why circulation is controlled is basically to make sure that each part of the cell gets its appropriate amount of metabolites. If you look at this regional circulation breakup, you can see that the coronary circulation is only 5% of the total, whereas cerebral is 15%, and splanchnic. Even the heart pumping the blood is the same, and the peripheral vascular resistance is the same, different organs are getting different circulation. And this is because of local regulation of circulation. We will see in this slide now that regional circulation is decided by regional peripheral vascular resistance. This is very important, and we are going to discuss this for the rest of the presentation. So as, for example, this is showing in the brain, there is cardiac output taking blood to the brain. Peripheral vascular resistance decides how much blood flow. But within the brain, again, there is further either increase or decrease in resistance of circulation that is taken to the brain to decide whether more blood should enter in a situation of increased demand. And if there is a situation when you need to reduce blood flow to the brain, this peripheral vascular resistance is also changed, and the local resistance in the brain is also changed. So what we'll see in this experiment that we are going to see and understand the rest of the presentation, in the brain, for example, the perfusion pressure, what is called CPP, is a difference between the mean perfusion and the intracranial pressure. We know that. You can see this is the mean blood pressure coming to the brain, and there is intracranial pressure, and together they decide how much perfusion happens to the brain. And it is the astrocytes, I will show you in the experiment, that decide what should be the amount of circulation that is happening and what should be the blood pressure and heart rate that's happening. In this simple mouse experiment, by raising this level of fluid, you could raise the intraventricular pressure and therefore raise the intracranial pressure. This would reduce the perfusion pressure to the brain, and they measured the level of calcium influx into the astrocytes. And as the baby's brain level of perfusion decreased, the calcium level of astrocytes increased, and immediately there was an increase in blood pressure and heart rate. This is showing that the brain had ability to control the blood pressure and heart rate based on its local metabolism. What is an astrocyte? These astrocytes are wrapping the neurons here, and they are able to control what should happen to the brain. So what did we learn till now? What we learned till now, that the purpose of circulation, and therefore what we are going to do in the NICU monitoring and treatment, is beyond just improving cardiac output and improving general peripheral vascular resistance. It would be about ideal perfusion of each vital organ, and this can be measured in the NICU by measuring the function of each vital organ, and this would be the primary endpoint in treatment of shock, not just increasing blood pressure or resistance. And since the whole aim is about taking oxygen and glucose to the cells, the first step in management of shock is to ensure that our sick baby has ideal oxygenation and ideal glucose. And I showed you that the local level, it's the calcium that determines the vascular resistance, and therefore there should be right amount of ionized calcium. In fact, the cardiac surgeons try to keep the ionized calcium level at 1.5 post cardiac surgery so that the shock can be maintained very well. Now, are there early signs of the shock so that as a doctor, as a resident in the NICU, I can recognize that a baby is getting shock and start treating this baby? Although we heard about blood pressure in the last presentation, and it remains the modality of measuring shock in neonates, it really is not the endpoint that we want. Long back, maybe about 100 years back, very clearly, Dr. Jarish recognized that we are measuring blood pressure only because we find it very easy to measure. But that's not the endpoint. The real issue is about perfusion of tissues, but we still don't have, or at least at that time did not have, a device to measure perfusion to tissues. So we depended on a much easier method, that is blood pressure. Now let us look at the measures of measuring perfusion. Capillary refill time, that is very, very simple, was measured in children, and it was found that in children who had a refill time which is prolonged more than 5 seconds had a very high chance of having shock. More than 4 times positive likelihood ratio was there. It's not very sensitive though, therefore it may not be present in all children with shock, but if it is present, it is a very sinister sign. What about in neonates? In neonates also, you can see in all settings, when they measured, the capillary refill time was always less than 3 seconds. And therefore, when measured over sternum or forehead, unlike in children where we are measuring on the peripheral area, if the refill time is more than 3 seconds, one needs to get worried. In adult ICUs, they looked at a very simple thing that we keep talking, that is called as a mottling score. We keep saying the baby's skin color is not good, it's looking mottled. And this is showing how mottling score is done when you measure. If it is a very large area that is mottled, the score is higher. So after admitting a sick adult to the ICU, 6 hours after admission, when they looked at the mottling score, this was a better predictor of death as well as of bad outcome. In contrast to mean arterial pressure, CVP, heart rate, cardiac index, all these were less able to predict outcomes than a mottling score. You can see that if mottling score was 4 to 5, then more patients died than when the mottling score was 0 to 1. The third measure of perfusion is what we know as core to peripheral temperature difference in neonates. Again, this is an adult study which showed that when the temperature of the toe, that is your periphery, to that of the ICU temperature was more, what you can see in the third picture, the toe to room temperature, then there was prediction of bad outcome. Again, indicating that poor perfusion in the form of core, that is the core, and the peripheral, that is the toe temperature difference, predicted shock much better. We spoke about regional perfusions in the liver, spleen, kidney, intestines. These were measured by Dopplers, and they were compared against these simple things that I told you: capillary refill time, mottling score, and peripheral temperature. And these predicted very well the local circulations in the liver, spleen, and kidney far better than blood pressure could. Recently published paper in adults showed that they are now going beyond macro circulation measures. that is your blood pressure, CVP, cardiac output I should look by echo, and mixed venous saturations, to very, very simple things like peripheral or microcirculation measures like skin mottling, urine output, refill time, and mottling scores. These seem to predict shock better, and a trial is going on which is trying to compare outcomes when you do shock management by looking at macrocirculation guided, I'll show you in the next slide, versus tissue perfusion guided monitoring. So tissue perfusion guided monitoring would be measure capillary refill time every hour, skin mottling every hour, arterial lactate, peripheral temperature, urine output, and blood pressure to make sure that it is a minimum number. And the old strategy of looking at blood pressures and CVP would become the macrocirculation target. The trial would get over next year and probably would get a very clear answer to what would happen. So what would be a chart that should be in my unit? If I'm monitoring circulation of a baby, I should have capillary refill time, heart rate, whether the peripheries are warm or cool, mottling of the baby, urine output, blood pressure is important, and blood gas on lactate measurements. A survey done about 5 years back showed that when people tried to predict what may be hypotension in the NICU, most units that were surveyed looked at capillary refill time, urine output, heart rate, color of peripheries, and base excess, the same thing that we have been saying in the last few minutes. Again, the new reviews published 5 years back tried to say that please move away from a single number that is a blood pressure in trying to treat babies, especially in ELBW babies. In the first few days, we know that ductus can cause change in blood pressure numbers and may not correlate with circulation. So treating hypotension should be done, or low BP should be done only if there is associated acidosis, hypoxia, poor cerebral circulation as in poor sensorium, or if there is a low blood pressure which is taking long time to get corrected. So this obviates and takes me away from this question whether BP should be non-invasive or invasive. In non-sick babies, a non-invasive, that is using a cuff, is just as good as an invasive baby. But unfortunately, when the baby gets sick, the difference between invasive and non-invasive BP becomes very high. And in critically sick ventilated babies, it may be important to do invasive BP monitoring. I'm going to skip the topic of echo because it's a topic by itself. But in sick preterm babies, knowing what is the cause of shock, whether it is a PDA, whether it's poor cardiac contractility, or whether I need to reduce the peripheral vascular resistance may help me in understanding what to do. Now, looking at the HIP trial, that is hypotension in preterm, we can learn the algorithm of treatment from them. Suppose I want to decide starting on inotrope. What I need to do is measure blood pressure at least twice before I make a decision at 15 minutes interval. And if it is less than gestational age, I might consider giving a saline and an inotrope. And then every 30 minutes, this is very important, every 30 minutes I reassess my circulation. And if it is not reached the target, I need to keep going up on the inotrope. Now, what would be my targets? A refill time which is more than 4, a lactate more than 4, and a blood pressure 4 less than gestational age would prompt me to keep increasing my inotrope or go to the next inotrope every 30 minutes. That means by 2 hours, I would have decided to start from 5 and reach 20 mics of no point in waiting every 3 to 4 hours and then trying to upgrade my inotrope. We should know that inotropes may not be always helpful. They may increase the blood pressure numbers, but they may not change anything that we call as flow or circulation to the areas that we want to change. So they may not improve the cerebral perfusion. In a study that was done trying to measure outcomes, they showed that using inotropes didn't seem to work. This looks like a busy slide, but if you look at survival to discharge are these black graphs, bars, which are nearly running in different directions all over the place. But these white hollow bars you can see are the unit habits of treating with antihypotensive drugs. Now, even units who were using more antihypotensive drugs did not seem to have better survivals, whether or not the blood pressure numbers were low or high. So by increasing use of antihypotensive agents or inotropes, we did not seem to improve survival. And different definitions of low BP were used, maybe using a different number like MAP less than gestational age, MAP less than 25, MAP less than 5th centile, whatever definition you use, the use of inotropes did not seem to definitely increase survival. If my inotropes don't work in a very small baby, say less than 1.2 kilo, then I must start thinking of adrenal insufficiency, and steroids must come in very early in treatment of these babies. It may be hydrocortisone or dexamethasone. So inotropes not treating the baby's blood pressure numbers should bring in use of hydrocortisone. And once the numbers improve, which may happen very rapidly in 6 to 12 hours, we must reduce the dose of hydrocortisone to half. I'm going to quickly sum up which is the inotrope to use. Mostly all of you might have expected that the presentation would focus on which is the best inotrope, but probably there are only some guides. At any point of time, if there is hypotension, low BP and poor circulation, dopamine remains the first choice currently. In babies who you can have an echo done and there is myocardial dysfunction clearly, which is more often in asphyxia or in severe sepsis, then dobutamine may become more important than dopamine. In septic shock, epinephrine may be useful. In a term healthy baby who presents with shock and did not have any risk factors, consider using prostin early. They may be due to ductus-dependent left-sided lesions. In severe PPHN, nitric oxide may be required to improve the shock because the cause may be in right heart not pumping out and filling the left heart. And even though there have been many controversies regarding PDA, its medical ligation, improvement of perfusion, a recent paper from Japan showed that babies who had a clear increase in LV dimension benefited by doing a medical or surgical treatment of PDA. So an echo which shows not only those criteria which we call as significant PDA, if there is an increase in LV dimension also, these babies will benefit by treatment. Milrinone, though a newer drug in treatment in NICUs, slightly overused, I guess, is probably best used again when echo shows poor LV or RV function. Very important, use milrinone only after doing an echo where you show a poor LV or RV dysfunction, function. LV function being poor after heart surgery, right heart failure due to PPHN, or extremely preterm babies who have a poor myocardium and poor function may benefit by milrinone. It can cause problem platelet, and if the BP falls after milrinone, it may take several hours to improve because milrinone has a long half-life. So if I say what I want to circulate into all your friends who have come on to and listen today, is that perfusion is more important. We want to take oxygen and glucose to the cells. Blood pressure is something we have learned to measure. It is seemingly more fashionable. But what matters to the cells is the perfusion, to take oxygen and glucose to the cells and take the metabolites away from the cells. Inotropes are not just something that will anyway help a sick baby. So please do not use inotropes. In some of the studies, increased use of inotropes is associated with more mortality. If there is a poor perfusion and fall in blood pressure, dopamine remains the choice, whatever the setting may be. Steroids come in early in extremely preterm babies if, let's say, 10 to 15 micro of dopamine don't work. And when you're monitoring treatment, again, monitoring every 30 minutes and upgrading your therapy based on perfusion and lactate would be the way to go. We know that most organs require flow coming in of circulation, and it is not blood pressure or pressure pumping into the organ that's required. So if I'm going to answer the question that we started with, resident asks you this time, sir, do I need to start an inotrope? Don't ask the question first, what is blood pressure, and then ask how is the perfusion. Please change the question. Ask them what is perfusion first, and then of course, what is the blood pressure. So I need to know what is the refill time, what is the core peripheral temperature difference, is there mottling, and then probably if I can have a lactate, if I can have a urine output end organ, sensorium of the baby, and if I can have also a measure of what is his heart rate, these may be more helpful than blood pressure. Of course, if blood pressure remains low for a long time, then I need to treat the baby. Thank you for your attention.
Yes,
Hello.
sir.
Yeah, Navin, you are again well known for making that complicated topic to teach in a very simple way. And I think you
Thank
have
you, sir.
done again delivered the excellent lecture of that the approach to a shock in a very simple way to all who are listening to your talk. Again, you're
Sure.
concentrated more on the perfusion rather than the blood pressure. I think the take-home message is the perfusion and maybe along with that the pressure and again importance to a perfusion. Thank you very much. And with
Thank
this,
you.
we will take up some questions to both the speakers. The Pratik, you are there?
Sir? Yeah, I'm
there
here,
are
sir.
few questions for you. Can we start with you?
Sure, sir.
Yeah, the first question is asked is, so suppose there is a hypertension is diagnosed in a healthy term or a preterm babies. So what is the short-term and long-term outcome of the documentation of this pressure? And is it going to have to develop a hypertension in adults?
Hypertension diagnosed in a healthy term baby, right, sir?
Yes, healthy term and not sure the question
Unfortunately,
is and the preterm
yeah.
baby. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there are no studies, as far as my knowledge goes, regarding the long-term outcome of healthy term babies. Mainly, if there is any other condition like renal cause or some other cause, the prognosis will be bad. But in a healthy term babies, if the baby is having hypertension, there should be a pathology. Only isolated blood pressure increase. I don't know. There are no long-term studies to state that. I didn't find anything in the literature about healthy term babies who developed hypertension in long term.
Okay. Thank you very much. And another question: is there any treatment of hypertension in neonates with the BPD? I think first of all, I think most of us are not documenting blood pressure when these babies comes for a follow-up. The first thing I think we need to document the blood pressure for all babies, the chronic follow-up. As you mentioned very clearly, either it's a respiratory etiology or the renal etiology, we need to monitor the blood pressure. So what do you think? Do you need to treat
with respect to bronchopulmonary dysplasia or whatever may be the etiology, we have to see the centile chart and then decide on treatment of this thing, BPD. Only thing is we have to avoid beta blockers beta blockers and alpha and beta blockers like labetalol. Labetalol and propranolol should be avoided in these babies because it can trigger a BPD spell. Otherwise, calcium channel blockers can be safely used in these babies for treatment of hypertension. If the hypertension is diagnosed and if it is more than 95th centile or with symptoms or 99th centile without symptoms, then it is always better to treat, provided the BP is properly and accurately measured.
Okay. Navin, do you think do we need to treat hypertension in chronic lung disease or BPD?
I had to confess that even if we are seeing something like 2 babies with BPD every month, we have not been focused on monitoring their blood pressures for hypertension.
Very right. I think we also didn't do so far. Yes.
Probably I learned from Pratik that we need to look at this. We look at many other things. There is a clear guideline on doing echoes on these babies on follow-up for pulmonary hypertension. But systemic hypertension has been a clinical miss. So I'm learning from this presentation today. So I have to confess that we have not picked up because we did not investigate these babies till now.
Yeah. Another question, Pratik. What is the first line and second line medication in the treatment of IV and oral in preterm and term babies with hypertension?
IV medication, one can use either hydralazine or sodium nitroprusside as a first line. Most of the Western literature, they describe nicardipine as a first line IV medication for especially for treatment of hypertensive emergencies. For oral, as I told earlier, calcium channel blockers or beta blockers can be used. ACE inhibitors should not be used if it's a preterm baby.
Yeah, I think you already explained about the BP cuff size. I think somebody asked for the BP cuff size. We already mentioned the length is about 80% and the width should be at least 0.45 to 0.4. Yes. I think again that question is very clear.
Can I add a point on the BB cuff?
Yes, Naveen, please go ahead. Yes.
Although there are a lot of accurate information and that does change the numbers, a practical guide must be that the nurses write on the chart which BP cuff was used, so that when the shift changes, the change of BP cuff should not change the blood pressure. So that is one. And a crude mnemonic would be 1 kg baby 1 cuff, 2 kg 2 cuff, and 3 kg 3 cuff, but it's not accurate. But at least make sure you're using the same size across the NICU care.
Okay, thank you very much for that inputs. Yeah. Another question Shivan Gowda has asked, most SNCU in government does not have multi-channel monitors to measure blood pressure. And I think Pratik has already mentioned, we need not to have always multi-channel monitors. We can use, what about the regular BP checking machine? Can we use for our term babies, Pratik?
Sir, that's what
Same setups.
we can use, but the cuff size in that, I don't know whether we get
Yes,
a proper
cuff
cuff
size
size for.
available. But the term baby cuff size is available, but we don't have a preterm baby cuff sizes available there. So there is also is not very easily available. So we can use it, but again, I think need a training of our residents, training of our nursing staff for using this BP cuffs.
Recently, Massimo has launched a pulse oximeter, which has inbuilt BP monitoring system in it. So, I mean, with the pulse oximeter, or if they're only asking for pulse oximeter, they can ask this for it, so that it has an additional BP thing.
Okay, I think these are the questions for Dr. Pratik. Dr. Naveen, I can't see any
Yes,
questions for you there. Prashant, do you see any questions for Dr. Naveen? Because it's very okay. There's one question is
there is one from Ravi. Do you think that management of low tissue perfusion should be based on etiology, which suggests more use of dobutamine, which helps in contractility, or using dopamine where peripheral vasoconstriction needed, like in sepsis?
Yes, of course, there has to be a thought given to what may be the cause. But a broad guide would be to monitor response to treatment, because most of us wouldn't have accurate methods like doing functional echo. You may have an echo machine, but not an expert who can do one and tell you what is the cardiac output. But if the blood pressure is normal, then we would not focus on dopamine or epinephrine or steroid first. But if the blood pressure is low, across the studies, there has been messages that you focus on dopamine, go up to 10, some say go up to 20 mics, and then maybe add epinephrine and steroids depending on your experience. But the most important point is keep monitoring every 30 minutes whether you're going in the right direction. If tachycardia doesn't come down, refill doesn't improve, sensorium doesn't improve, and if you are a very rich unit and you can do lactate every half an hour, it might start showing trends to improvement, then you are not in the right direction. So that may be the better way to go than to go by disease, because you often don't even know what is the disease, what is happening.
So what about noradrenaline? So you're not mentioned anywhere about the noradrenaline. Has got any role? That is also a question.
From whatever literature is available, NORAD's experience in units is lesser than with other inotropes, but isolated studies would be there. People would suggest that we have found benefit with this. I have found some papers talking about noradrenaline even in PPHN, some in sepsis, but I'm not sure about consistent practices. I will request people to share their experiences.
One more question. The role of levosimendan as an alternative to milrinone in a neonate with cardiac dysfunction?
No, I have no idea, sir. Honestly, I don't know.
So we don't use also, I can't mention also. I think we are not using in neonates this levosimendan. Maybe the infants and older child. Pratik, you have any any practical tips on that? Give us some and
No, sir. I don't see any. I don't know about any literature about its use in newborns.
Can I request Dinakar sir? You're there on. Are you able
Yeah,
to
Dr.
hear me?
Dr. Prashant.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah. And
Yeah.
Dr. Mohit
So-
also would like to join, sir. Dr. Mohit. Yeah, 1 second. Yeah, you can start, sir. Right? He will join.
Leslie, keep on asking Leslie.
yeah, normal saline bolus to be given in how much time? In term, preterm, and also when to use vasopressin. This is another question has been asked.
Okay, sir. With normal saline, except when there is obvious volume loss like a cord slippage, or if the baby has had been under a warmer for a long time and is having shock, probably more than one bolus maybe requiring a thought. Again, same monitoring whether this bolus has helped the baby or not. I would be reluctant to use a second or third bolus in a very small baby. In term babies, of course, who come with severe weight loss or a suspected CAH, you may use a large amount of saline boluses, even 20 to 30 ml per kg. It is given slower than in pediatrics. This may be probably directed to those pediatric colleagues who are seeing less newborns and more pediatric patients. In pediatrics, we tend to push saline boluses standing by the bedside of the baby in 5 to 10 minutes. But in newborns, we tend to be slower because probably the way the baby's heart can receive and distend to this volume may be different. And therefore, maybe we may not push the bolus in less than 20 to 30 minutes. I hope this answers the question, sir.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think most of us also follow the same principle.
With vasopressin, of course, there is some literature, and one of few of my babies, when we were not turning around in sepsis and in PPHN more so, we have used vasopressin once or twice, but not more than that. In PPHN, we have used 1 or 2 babies.
Okay. If suppose one more question, if the echo is not available, would you consider a combination of dopamine and dobutamine? It's very, I think the question
Yeah,
is.
there was the Avery that we studied in 2000 publication had concluded as the last paragraph that it may be a smart idea to start 10 mics of dopamine and 10 mics of dobutamine those days, considering that probably one will be an inotrope and other will probably serve like an inodilator. So I think if you are not sure and there is a baby whose perfusion is poor and blood pressure also is on the marginal side, maybe both are smart ideas together. But irrespective of the choice of inotrope, I would still stick on to the same mantra that keep making sure if the heart rate was high, it should start coming down, refills should start improving, and the baby sensorium should start getting better. And then you try and see which one is working for you.
If AKI is there and the term baby, and along with that sepsis, fluid wise, bolus or maintenance, do we need to make any changes?
I think I can just answer by guesswork rather than by scientific. So if it's a term baby, maybe I'll err on more than one bolus. But we must remember that if I really want to see the response in this sick baby, I may have to catheterize him, because otherwise I would not know whether urine output has improved after giving 1 or 2 boluses. The other side, flip side, is that we are reluctant to catheterize babies because of the risk of another infection coming in and trauma happening to a sick baby. But of course, if I need to go at second and third bolus, I would need to monitor the urine output very clearly to see whether it is helping me or not. So I would catheterize such a baby if I want to give more boluses.
Okay, there's another question. Do you think that management of low tissue perfusion should be based on etiology? And which suggests more use of a dobutamine, which helps with contractility, or using dopamine where peripheral vasoconstriction is needed, like sepsis?
I'll probably split the question into two. Is that, does it depend on etiology? Yes. If it is a baby who is 700 or 800 grammer, I would be worried about PDA and cortisol insufficiency first. But if it is a term baby, maybe I will think of infection, and appropriately, if there is low blood pressure, dopamine would come first. And in the absence of low blood pressure, let us say asphyxia, then I would think of myocardial dysfunction first, and dobutamine or milrinone may become a higher choice. But before going to milrinone, I would request for an echo if it's possible to see whether LV dysfunction is there.
Any dose in the adrenaline do you consider for a septic baby's maximum dose before you consider for the steroids?
I have to confess, I can't remember the doses honestly, and the residents dial them most of the time. But if the heart rate is going up, then I would say this is enough with adrenaline, and I would go to steroid first.
I
So
think
that
it's
would be my endpoint.
I think 0.1 to 1 microgram is a maximum, but most of the times we never reach that. We somewhere between 0.1 to 0.5 micrograms, and then yes.
Because previously we used to read about the receptors in newborns being different, and the response to the same doses in pediatric and adult may not be noted in newborns. So if heart rate is exceeding 170, 180 and it's going up, whatever inotrope you have been increasing is going in the wrong direction, that's for sure.
So one question is there, I think, which is regarding the NIRS monitoring, and is it feasible?
Personally, I have not used it for more than a month. We had a demo machine kept in the unit about 5 years back.
Okay.
And that seems to be the future, because probably we will not have BP cuffs around the hands and thighs. We'll probably have one cuff around the forehead, one cuff around the abdomen to measure the abdominal circulation and renal circulation. And maybe we would be looking at these as outputs, but this is futuristic. So there will be more confusion at that time as to what to do. So that would be the endpoint, to look at regional circulations, but probably we don't know as yet what we would do with the data.
I think one more question is, tachycardia is very often with the post inotropes. Is there any way to monitor the heart rates? But I think we monitor the heart rate. But I think, as you mentioned very clearly, in addition to the heart rate, we need to monitor the lactate, monitor the urine output, the other parameters too. Any other things thinking are there, Naveen?
And no, we need to know that 140 heart rate is the highest heart rate that myocardium can generate, because there is no vagal tone in the neonate which is controlling. And every time you start going away 150, 160, there is only marginal increase in cardiac output actually, because the myocardium is not great actually in its function. The intercalated discs are very poor. So if you are going heart rate beyond 160 and the inotrope is increasing the heart rate, you are actually harming the baby by worsening the cardiac output. So your heart rate should decrease when you are using an inotrope if you are helping the baby. This is a very clear message that heart rates which are going over 160, 170 are not going to help the neonate. They're only going to reduce the cardiac output. They're probably side effects of inotropes rather than benefits of inotropes.
I think Prashant and these are the questions we have for both the speakers. Actually, it is a very good topic, and they have covered every aspect.
One question I've got, sir. One question from Facebook. Jaspreet Singh has asked, if perfusion is good, for how long we can withhold inotropes despite low BP?
This is answered only as a protocol in the HIP trial. In the HIP trial, which is not yet completed, I kept looking for the data, it's not completed as yet. They have suggested that prolonged is 30 minutes, I think they have said, 2 records at 15 minutes interval, and if the blood pressure numbers are at least 5 below the gestation age. So if the baby is 30 weeker and the mean pressure is less than 25 for more than half an hour, then even if the perfusion is poor, one might err on the side of try to treat. But this is only a protocol. This is not the recommendation. So in a very, very tiny baby, let us say 1,000 grammer or 900 grammer, if the blood pressure number is low, the baby's perfusion is good, baby's heart rate is good, ionized calcium sugars are good, and I do a lactate also, if I'm rich enough to do a lactate, and the lactate is also good, then it depends who is the consultant on call actually, honestly. I would be very reluctant to start inotropes. But if my colleague started inotropes, I cannot say they're wrong. But then I would monitor whether whatever I wanted to change, say blood pressure improved without worsening the heart rate, without worsening the perfusion, then we are in the right direction.
Sir Dinakar sir.
Yes.
Anything you would like to tell?
Hello.
Hello, and we have joined Dr.
No, all the
Mohit
questions.
Saini.
Any questions
Sir, Dr.
any
Mohit Saini.
are there?
Dr. Mohit Saini, who has been elected as NNF State President Gujarat, he has joined us. Dr. Mohit and Dr. Monica Kaushal from Dubai, we have. Dr. Mohit? Yeah, yes, sir, please, sir, till he joins. Dinakar, sir?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
My
Any more
personal
questions?
regards to both Mohit and Monica, good friends. And Mohit, I hope he can come on because he is the hemodynamic person of the country. So we would like to hear him.
Dr. Mohit? He was around. Dr. Mohit, are you able to hear us? I think, sir, you can, Dinakar, sir?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Is there
Please
any
carry on.
questions? Any questions? You are the moderator. Any questions are there, boss?
No, I want to most of the questions given on the chat box. I think all questions is answered by both excellent speakers. But any other personal questions also can ask to them. They are so good, both of them.
Very nice questions. And somebody has asked about the calcium, how it causes, calcium causes hypertension, hypercalcemia.
Hypercalcemia causes hypertension mainly by the vasoconstriction of blood vessels, by increasing the peripheral vascular resistance.
Yeah. At the same time, it will induce us even increases of epinephrine.
Yes.
Yes, two things.
But
So one more person has asked, what is that? One more question. What is it? What is that? Okay. How IUGR or maternal hypertension will induce us the IUGR baby with the placental abnormal circulation, or what is it? Then maternal hypertension will cause hypertension in a neonate.
IUGR, the cause of hypertension is mainly because of, I mean, it's a proposed hypothesis, mainly because of decreased nephron number. And these babies also develop hypertension in future in adult life.
Yes. Decreased nephrons. It's all two questions I have seen, whatever they are. Excellent topics. Naveen Jain sir, excellent. Pratik, Dr. Pratik, excellent topics. Beautiful.
Thank you so much for that. Everybody is spending time in this pandemic of webinars, and every day many resources are bombarding webinars to people, and it's really a pleasure that everyone is coming on to listen to us.
Yes, sir. All the people today is 421. 421 people have logged in the webinar today. Very nice. And even though all the people have started their hospital, clinics, everything they started, still 421. It was a good one. And even in the YouTube, people have logged in. I don't know the number. Even in the Facebook, they logged in. I don't know the number. That means people are interested about NNFK, what we are conducting the webinar. Thank you, everybody. Please to participate. Tomorrow, there is a beautiful topic regarding the lactation and virtual tour of milk bank. So Dr. Srinath Manikanti is going to take us virtual tour. It will be very nice. Even many people, even including me, I have seen only once, or many people have not seen how the milk bank will work, how they will take the milk, from where they will take the milk, how they will do it. So many things are there in the milk bank, whether to precipitate, whether to skim, what will happen, what all with the lipids, polyunsaturated, everything. It is a very nice topic. And another one more topic about the lactation, what we are facing every day in the NICU with the mothers. So Dr. none other than a great personality, Dr. Asha Benakappa is going to talk about tomorrow's talk in the same time, 5 o'clock. Thank you very much, sir. Over to Prashant and people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Sir Naveen sir, you have got a huge congratulation list from all over the world. Dr. Monica Kaushal from Dubai, she has wished. Dr. Mohit Saini, are you able to hear? He has wished. It is really a very proud moment for all of us. Once again, congratulations, sir. And all
Thank
of us
you, dear.
from NNF Karnataka have wished you. All our past president, everybody has wished you, and they were all very happy. Doctor, thank you for wonderful presentation, sir. Dr. Pradeep, wonderful. You did a perfect job of handling hypertension and lowering our pressure in terms of management. Thank you very much. And I request all the participants to log in tomorrow, as Dr. Dinakar sir has told you about we're going to take you on the virtual tour about how exactly it is stored and how it is tagged, how the sterile, unsterile thawing, and how it is distributed across Bangalore. And so far, till date, how many liters of human milk has been dissipated in Bangalore. So it's going to present all the data with our lactation doctor. She's been called as lactation doctor, Dr. Asha Benkappa ma'am. She's going to talk about lactation management. So let us join. Thank you very much, all the participants. And thank you for our wonderful speaker. Thank you, Leslie sir, for moderating the session. We'll catch up tomorrow. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.